Such was the darkness of the place it was scarcely possible to discern objects, but through the transparent crepe of a fair summer's night, the queen of that lovely place seemed to me adorable. "Oh," she said to me with an angelic voice, "let us leave this dangerous spot. Resistance here is beyond our strength." She drew me away and we left the pavilion with regret. "Ah, how happy is she!" cried Madame de T. "Whom do you mean?" I asked. "Did I speak?" said she with a look of alarm. And then we reached the grassy bank, and stopped there involuntarily. "What a distance there is," she said to me, "between this place and the pavilion." "Yes indeed," said I, "but must this bank be always ominous? Is there a regret?" "Is there?" I do not know by what magic it took place, but at this point the conversation changed and became less serious. She ventured even to speak playfully of the pleasures of love, to eliminate from them all moral considerations, to reduce them to their simplest elements, and to prove that the favors of lovers were mere pleasure, that there were no pledges, philosophically speaking, excepting those which were given to the world, when we allowed it to penetrate our secrets and joined it in the acts of indiscretion. "How mild is the night," she said, "which we have by chance picked out. Well, if there are reasons, as I suppose there are, which compel us to part tomorrow, our happiness, ignored as it is by all nature, will not leave us any ties to dissolve. There will, perhaps, be some regrets, the pleasant memory of which will give us reparation, and then there will be a mutual understanding, without all the delays, the fuss and the tyranny of legal proceedings. We are such machines, and I blush to avow it, that in place of all the shrinkings that tormented me before this scene took place, I was half inclined to embrace the boldness of these principles, and I felt already disposed to indulge in the love of liberty. This beautiful night," she continued, "this lovely scenery at this moment have taken on fresh charms. Oh, let us never forget this pavilion. The chateau," she added smilingly, "contains a still more charming place, but I dare not show you anything. You are like a child, who wishes to touch everything and breaks everything that he touches." Moved by a sentiment of curiosity, I protested that I was a very good child. She changed the subject. "This night," she said, "would be for me without a regret if I were not vexed with myself for what I said to you about the Countess. Not that I wish to find fault with you. Novelty attracts me. You have found me amiable, I should like to believe in your good faith. But the dominion of habit takes a long time to break through, and I have not learned the secret of doing this. By the by, what do you think of my husband?" "Well, he is rather cross, but I suppose he could not be otherwise to me." "Oh, that is true, but his way of life isn't pleasant, and he could not see you here with indifference. He might be suspicious even of our friendship." "Oh, he is so already." "Confess that he has cause. Therefore you must not prolong this visit, he might take it amiss. As soon as anyone arrives," and she added with a smile, "someone is going to arrive, you must go. You have to keep up appearance, you know." remember his manner when he left us tonight." I was tempted to interpret this adventure as a trap, but as she noticed the impression made by her words, she added, "Oh, he was very much gayer when he was superintending the arrangement of the cabinet I told you about. That was before my marriage." This passage leads to my apartment. Alas! It testifies to the cunning artifices to which Monsieur de T. has resorted in protecting his love for me. "How pleasant it would be," I said to her, keenly excited by the curiosity she had roused in me, "to take vengeance in this spot for the insults which your charms have suffered, and to seek to make restitution for the pleasures of which you have been robbed." She doubtless thought this remark in good taste, but she said, "You promised to be good." I threw a veil over the follies which every age will pardon to youth, on the ground of so many balked desires and bitter memories. In the morning, scarcely raising her liquid eyes, Madame de T., fairer than ever, said to me, "Now will you ever love the Countess as much as you do me?" I was about to answer when her maid, her confidante, appeared saying, "You must go. It is broad daylight, 11 o'clock, and the chateau is already awake." All had vanished like a dream. I found myself wandering through the corridors before I had recovered my senses. How could I regain my apartment, not knowing where it was? Any mistake might bring about an exposure. I resolved on a morning walk. The coolness of the fresh air gradually tranquilized my imagination and brought me back to the world of reality, and now instead of a world of enchantment I saw myself in my soul, and my thoughts were no longer disturbed but followed each other in connected order. In fact, I breathed once more. I was, above all things, anxious to learn what I was to her so lately left, I who knew that she had been desperately in love with the Marquise de V. Could she have broken with him? Had she taken me to be his successor, or only to punish him? What a night! What an adventure! Yes, and what a delightful woman! While I floated on the waves of these thoughts, I heard a sound near at hand. I raised my eyes, I rubbed them, I could not believe my senses. Can you guess who it was? The Marquise de V. "You did not expect to see me so early, did you?" he said. "How has it all gone off? Did you know that I was here?" I asked in utter amazement. "Oh, yes, I received word just as you left Paris." "Have you played your part well? Did not the husband think your visit ridiculous? Was he put out? When are you going to take leave?" "You had better go. I have made every provision for you. I have brought you a good carriage. It is at your service. This is the way I requite you, my dear friend. You may rely on me in the future, for a man is grateful for such services as yours." These last words gave me the key to the whole mystery, and I saw how I stood. "But why should you have come so soon?" I asked him. "It would have been more prudent to have waited a few days. I foresaw that, and it is only chance that has brought me here. I am supposed to be on my way back from a neighboring country house. But has not Madame de T. taken you into her secret? I am surprised at her want of confidence, after all you have done for us. My dear friend, I replied, she doubtless had her reasons. Perhaps I did not play my part very well. Has everything been very pleasant? Tell me the particulars, come, tell me. Now wait a moment. I did not know that this was to be a comedy, and although Madame de T. gave me a part in the play, it wasn't a very nice one. Do not worry yourself, there are no bad parts for good actors. I understand, you acquitted yourself well. Admirably. And Madame de T. is adorable. To think of being able to win such a woman, said he, stopping short in our walk, and looking triumphantly at me. Oh, what pains I have taken with her! And I have at last brought her to a point where she is perhaps the only woman in Paris on whose fidelity a man may infallibly count. You have succeeded. Yes, in that lies my special talent. Her inconstancy was mere frivolity, unrestrained imagination. It was necessary to change that disposition of hers, but you have no idea of her attachment to me. But really, is she not charming? I quite agree with you. And yet enter now I recognize one fault in her. Nature, in giving her everything, has denied her that flame divine which puts the crown on all other endowments. While she rouses in others the ardor of passion, she feels none herself, she is a thing of marble. I am compelled to believe you, for I have had no opportunity of judging, but do you think that you know that woman as well as if you were her husband? It is possible to be deceived. If I had not dined yesterday with the veritable, I should take you. By the way, has he been good? Oh, I was received like a dog. I understand. Let us go in, let us look for Madame de T. She must be up by this time. But should we not out of decency begin with the husband? I said to him. You are right. Let us go to your room, I wish to put on a little powder. But tell me, did he really take you for her lover? You may judge by the way he receives me, but let us go at once to his apartment. I wished to avoid having to lead him to an apartment whose whereabouts I did not know, but by chance we found it. The door was open and there I saw my valet de chambre asleep on an armchair. A candle was going out on a table beside him. He drowsily offered a night robe to the marquise. I was on pins and needles, but the marquise was in a mood to be easily deceived, took the man for a mere sleepyhead, and made a joke of the matter. We passed on to the apartment of Monsieur de T. There was no misunderstanding the reception which he accorded me, and the welcome, the compliments which he addressed to the marquise, whom he almost forced to stay. He wished to take him to Madame in order that she might insist on his staying. As for me, I received no such invitation. I was reminded that my health was delicate, the country was damp, fever was in the air, and I seemed so depressed that the chateau would prove too gloomy for me. The marquise offered me his chaise and I accepted it. The husband seemed delighted and we were all satisfied. But I could not refuse myself the pleasure of seeing Madame de T. once more. My impatience was wonderful. My friend conceived no suspicions from the late sleep of his mistress. "Isn't this fine?" he said to me as we followed Monsieur de T. He couldn't have spoken more kindly if she had dictated his words. "He is a fine fellow. I am not in the least annoyed by this reconciliation. They will make a good home together, and you will agree with me, that he could not have chosen a wife better able to do the honors." "Certainly," I replied. "However pleasant the adventure has been," he went on with an air of mystery, "you must be off. I will let Madame de T. understand that her secret will be well kept. On that point, my friend, she perhaps counts more on me than on you, for you see her sleep is not disturbed by the matter." "Oh, I quite agree that there is no one like you for putting a woman to sleep." "Yes, and a husband too, and if necessary a lover, my dear friend." At last Monsieur de T. was admitted to his wife's apartment, and there we were all summoned. "I trembled," said Madame de T. to me, "for fear you would go before I awoke, and I thank you for saving me the annoyance which that would have caused me." "Madame," I said, and she must have perceived the feeling that was in my tones, "I come to say good-bye." She looked at me and at the Marquise with an air of disquietude, but the self-satisfied, knowing look of her lover reassured her. She laughed in her sleeve with me as if she would console me as well as she could, without lowering herself in my eyes. "He has played his part well," the Marquise said to her in a low voice, pointing to me, "and my gratitude—" "Let us drop the subject," interrupted Madame de T. "You may be sure that I am well aware of all I owe him." At last Monsieur de T. with a sarcastic remark, dismissed me. My friend threw the dust in his eyes by making fun of me, and I paid back both of them by expressing my admiration for Madame de T. who made fools of us all without forfeiting her dignity. I took myself off, but Madame de T. followed me, pretending to have a commission to give me. "Adieu, monsieur," she said, "I am indebted to you for the very great pleasure you have given me, but I have paid you back with a beautiful dream," and she looked at me with an expression of subtle meaning. "But adieu, and forever. You have plucked a solitary flower, blossoming in its loveliness, which no man—" She stopped and her thought evaporated in a sigh, but she checked the rising flood of sensibility and smiled significantly. "The Countess loves you," she said. "If I have robbed her of some transports, I give you back to her less ignorant than before. Adieu. Do not make mischief between my friend and me." She wrung my hand and left me. More than once the ladies who had mislaid their fans blushed as they listened to the old gentleman, whose brilliant elocution won their indulgence for certain details which we have suppressed, as too erotic for the present age. Nevertheless, we may believe that each lady complimented him in private, for some time afterwards he gave to each of them, as also to the masculine guests, a copy of this charming story, 25 copies of which were printed by Pierre Didet. It is from copy number 24 that the author has transcribed this tale, hitherto unpublished, and, strange to say, attributed to Dorat. It has the merit of yielding important lessons for husbands, while at the same time it gives the celibates a delightful picture of morals in the last century. Meditation XXV. Of allies. Of all the miseries that civil war can bring upon a country, the greatest lies in the appeal which one of the contestants always ends by making to some foreign government. Unhappily we are compelled to confess that all women make this great mistake, for the lover is only the first of their soldiers. It may be a member of their family or at least a distant cousin. This meditation, then, is intended to answer the inquiry, what assistance can each of the different powers which influence human life give to your wife? Or better than that, what artifices will she resort to arm them against you? Two beings united by marriage are subject to the laws of religion and society, to those of private life, and, from considerations of health, to those of medicine. We will therefore divide this important meditation into 6 paragraphs, one of religions and of confession, considered in their connection with marriage. 2 of the mother-in-law. 3 of boarding school friends and intimate friends. 4 of the lover's allies. 5 of the maid. 6 of the doctor. 1 of religions and of confession, considered in their connection with marriage. La Bruyère has very wittily said, "It is too much for a husband to have ranged against him both devotion and gallantry, a woman ought to choose but one of them for her ally." The author thinks that La Bruyère is mistaken. 2 of the mother-in-law. Up to the age of 30 The Face of a Woman is a book written in a foreign tongue, which one may still translate in spite of all the feminisms of the idiom, but on passing her 40th year a woman becomes an insoluble riddle, and if anyone can see through an old woman, it is another old woman. Some diplomats have attempted on more than one occasion the diabolical task of gaining over the dowagers who opposed their machinations, but if they have ever succeeded it was only after making enormous concessions to them, for diplomats are practiced people and we do not think that you can employ their recipe in dealing with your mother-in-law. She will be the first aide-de-camp of her daughter, for if the mother did not take her daughter's side, it would be one of those monstrous and unnatural exceptions, which unhappily for husbands are extremely rare. When a man is so happy as to possess a mother-in-law who is well preserved, he may easily keep her in check for a certain time, although he may not know any young celibate brave enough to assail her. But generally husbands who have the slightest conjugal genius will find a way of pitting their own mother against that of their wife, and in that case they will naturally neutralize each other's power. To be able to keep a mother-in-law in the country while he lives in Paris, and vice versa, is a piece of good fortune which a husband too rarely meets with. What of making mischief between the mother and the daughter? That may be possible, but in order to accomplish such an enterprise he must have the metallic heart of Richelieu, who made a son and a mother deadly enemies to each other. However, the jealousy of a husband who forbids his wife to pray to male saints and wishes her to address only female saints, would allow her liberty to see her mother. Many sons-in-law take an extreme course which settles everything, which consists in living on bad terms with their mothers-in-law. This unfriendliness would be very adroit policy, if it did not inevitably result in drawing tighter the ties that unite mother and daughter. These are about all the means which you have for resisting maternal influence in your home. As for the services which your wife can claim from her mother, they are immense, and the assistance which she may derive from the neutrality of her mother is not less powerful. But on this point everything passes out of the domain of science, for all is veiled in secrecy. The reinforcements which a mother brings up in support of a daughter are so varied in nature, they depend so much on circumstances, that it would be folly to attempt even a nomenclature for them. Yet you may write out among the most valuable precepts of this conjugal gospel, the following maxims. A husband should never let his wife visit her mother unattended. A husband ought to study all the reasons why all the celibates under 40 who form her habitual society are so closely united by ties of friendship to his mother-in-law, for, if a daughter rarely falls in love with the lover of her mother has always a weak spot for her daughter's lover. 3 of boarding school friends and intimate friends. Louise de L. Daughter of an officer killed at Wagram, had been the object of Napoleon's special protection. She left EQN to marry a commissary general, the Baron de V. Who is very rich. Louise was 18 and the Baron 40. She was ordinary in face and her complexion could not be called white, but she had a charming figure, good eyes, a small foot, a pretty hand, good taste and abundant intelligence. The Baron, worn out by the fatigues of war and still more by the excesses of a stormy youth, had one of those faces upon which the Republic, the Directory, the Consulate and the Empire seemed to have set their impress. He became so deeply in love with his wife, that he asked and obtained from the Emperor a post at Paris, in order that he might be enabled to watch over his treasure. He was as jealous as Count Almaviva, still more from vanity than from love. The young orphan had married her husband from necessity, and, flattered by the ascendancy she wielded over a man much older than herself, waited upon his wishes and his needs, but her delicacy was offended from the first days of their marriage by the habits and ideas of a man whose manners were tinged with republican license. He was a predestined. I do not know exactly how long the Baron made his honeymoon last, nor when war was declared in his household, but I believe it happened in 1816, at a very brilliant ball given by Monsieur D. a commissariat officer, that the Commissary General, who had been promoted head of the department, admired the beautiful Madame B. the wife of a banker, and looked at her much more amorously than a married man should have allowed himself to do. At 2 o'clock in the morning it happened that the banker, tired of waiting any longer, went home leaving his wife at the ball. "We are going to take you home to your house," said the Baroness to Madame B. Monsieur de V. Offer your arm to Emily. And now the Baron is seated in his carriage next to a woman who, during the whole evening, had been offered and had refused 1,000 attentions, and from whom he had hoped in vain to win a single look. There she was, in all the luster of her youth and beauty, displaying the whitest shoulders and the most ravishing lines of beauty. Her face, which still reflected the pleasures of the evening, seemed to vie with the brilliancy of her satin gown, her eyes to rival the blaze of her diamonds, and her skin to cope with the soft whiteness of the marabouts which tied in her hair, set off the ebon tresses and the ringlets dangling from her headdress. Her tender voice would stir the chords of the most insensible hearts. In a word, so powerfully did she wake up love in the human breast that Robert d'Abrissel himself would perhaps have yielded to her. The Baron glanced at his wife, who, overcome with fatigue, had sunk to sleep in a corner of the carriage. He compared, in spite of himself, the toilette of Louise and that of Emily. Now on occasions of this kind the presence of a wife is singularly calculated to sharpen the unquenchable desires of a forbidden love. Moreover, the glances of the Baron, directed alternately to his wife and to her friend, were easy to interpret, and Madame B. interpreted them. "Poor Louise," she said, "she is overtired. Going out does not suit her, her tastes are so simple. At EQN she was always reading, and you, what used you to do?" "I, sir? Oh, I thought about nothing but acting comely. It was my passion." "But why do you so rarely visit Madame de V. ? We have a country house at St. Prix, where we could have a comedy acted, in a little theatre which I have built there." "If I have not visited Madame de V. , whose fault is it?" she replied. "You are so jealous that you will not allow her either to visit her friends or to receive them." "I jealous?" cried Monsieur de V. , "after 4 years of marriage, and after having had 3 children." "Hush," said Emily, striking the fingers of the Baron with her fan, "Louise is not asleep." The carriage stopped, and the Baron offered his hand to his wife's fair friend and helped her to get out. "I hope," said Madame B., "that you will not prevent Louise from coming to the ball which I am giving this week." The Baron made her a respectful bow. This ball was a triumph of Madame B.'s and the ruin of the husband of Louise, for he became desperately enamored of Emily, to whom he would have sacrificed 100 lawful wives. Some months after that evening on which the Baron gained some hopes of succeeding with his wife's friend, he found himself one morning at the house of Madame B., when the maid came to announce the Baroness de V. "Ah," cried Emily, "if Louise were to see you with me at such an hour as this, she would be capable of compromising me. Go into that closet and don't make the least noise." The husband, caught like a mouse in a trap, concealed himself in the closet. "Good day, my dear," said the 2 women, kissing each other. "Why are you come so early?" asked Emily. "Oh, my dear, cannot you guess? I came to have an understanding with you." "What, a duel?" "Precisely, my dear. I am not like you, not I. I love my husband and am jealous of him. You are beautiful, charming, you have the right to be a coquette, you can very well make fun of B. to whom your virtue seems to be of little importance. But as you have plenty of lovers in society, I beg you that you will leave me my husband. He is always at your house, and he certainly would not come unless you were the attraction. What a very pretty jacket you have on. Do you think so? My maid made it. Then I shall get Anastasia to take a lesson from Flore. So, then, my dear, I count on your friendship to refrain from bringing trouble in my house. But, my child, I do not know how you can conceive that I should fall in love with your husband. He is coarse and fat as a deputy of the centre. He is short and ugly. I will allow that he is generous, but that is all you can say for him, and this is a quality which is all in all only to opera girls, so that you can understand, my dear, that if I were choosing a lover, as you seem to suppose I am, I wouldn't choose an old man like your Baron. If I have given him any hopes, if I have received him, it was certainly for the purpose of amusing myself, and of giving you liberty, for I believed you had a weakness for young Rostanges. Exclaimed Louise, God preserve me from it, my dear, he is the most intolerable coxcomb in the world. No, I assure you, I love my husband. You may laugh as you choose, it is true. I know it may seem ridiculous, but consider, he has made my fortune, he is no miser, and he is everything to me, for it has been my unhappy lot to be left an orphan. Now even if I did not love him, I ought to try to preserve his esteem. Have I a family who will some day give me shelter? Come, my darling, let us speak no more about it, said Emily, interrupting her friend, for it tires me to death. After a few trifling remarks the Baroness left. How is this, monsieur? Cried Madame B. Opening the door of the closet where the Baron was frozen with cold, for this incident took place in winter. How is this? Aren't you ashamed of yourself for not adoring a little wife who is so interesting? Don't speak to me of love. You may idolize me, as you say you do, for a certain time, but you will never love me as you love Louise. I can see that in your heart I shall never outweigh the interest inspired by a virtuous wife, children, and a family circle. I should one day be deserted and become the object of your bitter reflections. You would coldly say of me, I have had that woman. That phrase I have heard pronounced by men with the most insulting indifference. You see, monsieur, that I reason in cold blood, and that I do not love you, because you never would be able to love me. What must I do then to convince you of my love? Cried the Baron, fixing his gaze on the young woman. She had never appeared to him so ravishingly beautiful as at that moment, when her soft voice poured forth a torrent of words whose sternness was belied by the grace of her gestures, by the pose of her head and by her coquettish attitude. Oh, when I see Louise in possession of a lover, she replied, when I know that I am taking nothing away from her, and that she has nothing to regret in losing your affection, when I am quite sure that you love her no longer, and have obtained certain proof of your indifference towards her, oh, then I may listen to you. These words must seem odious to you, she continued in an earnest voice, and so indeed they are, but do not think that they have been pronounced by me. I am the rigorous mathematician who makes his deductions from a preliminary proposition. You are married, and do you deliberately set about making love to someone else? I should be mad to give any encouragement to a man who cannot be mine eternally. Demon, exclaimed the husband. Yes, you are a demon, and not a woman. Come now, you are really amusing, said the young woman as she seized the bell rope. Oh, no, Emily, continued the lover of 40, in a calmer voice. Do not ring, stop, forgive me. I will sacrifice everything for you. But I do not promise you anything, she answered quickly with a laugh. My God! How you make me suffer, he exclaimed. Well, and have not you in your life caused the unhappiness of more than one person, she asked. Remember all the tears which have been shed through you and for you. Oh, your passion does not inspire me with the least pity. If you do not wish to make me laugh, make me share your feelings. Adieu, madam, there is a certain clemency in your sternness. I appreciate the lesson you have taught me. Yes, I have many faults to expiate. Well then, go and repent of them, she said with a mocking smile. In making Louise happy you will perform the rudest penance in your power. They parted. But the love of the Baron was too violent to allow of Madame B.'s harshness failing to accomplish her end, namely, the separation of the married couple. At the end of some months the Baron de V. and his wife lived apart, though they lived in the same mansion. The Baroness was the object of universal pity, for in public she always did justice to her husband and her resignation seemed wonderful. The most prudish women of society found nothing to blame in the friendship which united Louise to the young Rostanges. And all was laid to the charge of Monsieur de V.'s folly. When this last had made all the sacrifices that a man could make for Madame B., his perfidious mistress started for the waters of Mount Dore, for Switzerland and for Italy, on the pretext of seeking the restoration of her health. The Baron died of inflammation of the liver, being attended during his sickness by the most touching ministrations which his wife could lavish upon him, and judging from the grief which he manifested at having deserted her, he seemed never to have suspected her participation in the plan which had been his ruin. This anecdote, which we have chosen from 1,000 others, exemplifies the services which two women can render each other. From the words, "Let me have the pleasure of bringing my husband up to the conception of the drama, whose denouement was inflammation of the liver," every female perfidy was assembled to work out the end. Certain incidents will, of course, be met with which diversify more or less the typical example which we have given, but the march of the drama is almost always the same. Moreover, a husband ought always to distrust the women friends of his wife. The subtle artifices of these lying creatures rarely fail of their effect, for they are seconded by two enemies, who always keep close to a man, and these are vanity and desire. 4 of the lover's allies. The man who hastens to tell another man that he has dropped 1,000-franc bill from his pocket-book, or even that the handkerchief is coming out of his pocket, would think it a mean thing to warn him that someone was carrying off his wife. There is certainly something extremely odd in this moral inconsistency, but after all it admits of explanation. Since the law cannot exercise any interference with matrimonial rights, the citizens have even less right to constitute themselves a conjugal police, and when one restores a 1,000-franc bill to him who has lost it, he acts under a certain kind of obligation, founded on the principle which says, "Do unto others as ye would they should do unto you." But by what reasoning can justification be found for the help which one celibate never asks in vain, but always receives from another celibate in deceiving a husband, and how shall we qualify the rendering of such help? A man who is incapable of assisting a gendarme in discovering an assassin, has no scruple in taking a husband to a theatre, to a concert or even to a questionable house, in order to help a comrade, whom he would not hesitate to kill in a duel tomorrow, in keeping an assignation, the result of which is to introduce into a family a spurious child, and to rob two brothers of a portion of their fortune by giving them a co-heir whom they never perhaps would otherwise have had, or to effect the misery of 3 human beings. We must confess that integrity is a very rare virtue, and, very often, the man that thinks he has most actually has least. Families have been divided by feuds, and brothers have been murdered, which events would never have taken place if some friend had refused to perform what passes to the world as a harmless trick. It is impossible for a man to be without some hobby or other, and all of us are devoted either to hunting, fishing, gambling, music, money, or good eating. Well, your ruling passion will always be an accomplice in the snare which a lover sets for you. The invisible hand of this passion will direct your friends, or his, whether they consent or not, to play a part in the little drama when they want to take you away from home, or to induce you to leave your wife to the mercy of another. A lover will spend 2 whole months, if necessary, in planning the construction of the mousetrap. I have seen the most cunning men on earth thus taken in. There was a certain retired lawyer of Normandy. He lived in the little town of B., where a regiment of the chasseurs of Cantal were garrisoned. A fascinating officer of this regiment had fallen in love with the wife of this pettifogger, and the regiment was leaving before the 2 lovers had been able to enjoy the least privacy. It was the 4th military man over whom the lawyer had triumphed. As he left the dinner table one evening, about 6 o'clock, the husband took a walk on the terrace of his garden from which he could see the whole countryside. The officers arrived at this moment to take leave of him. Suddenly the flame of a conflagration burst forth on the horizon. Heavens! L'Ordinaire is on fire, exclaimed the major. He was an old simple-minded soldier, who had dined at home. Every one mounted horse. The young wife smiled as she found herself alone, for her lover, hidden in the coppice, had said to her, "It is a straw stack on fire." The flank of the husband was turned with all the more facility in that a fine courser was provided for him by the captain, and with a delicacy very rare in the cavalry, the lover actually sacrificed a few moments of his happiness in order to catch up with the cavalcade, and return in company with the husband. Marriage is a veritable duel, in which persistent watchfulness is required in order to triumph over an adversary, for, if you are unlucky enough to turn your head, the sword of the celibate will pierce you through and through. 5 of the maid. The prettiest waiting maid I have ever seen is that of Madame V. Y., a lady who today plays at Paris a brilliant part among the most fashionable women, and passes for a wife who keeps on excellent terms with her husband. Mademoiselle Celestine is a person whose points of beauty are so numerous that, in order to describe her, it would be necessary to translate the 30 verses which we are told form an inscription in the seraglio of the Grand Turk and contain each of them an excellent description of one of the 30 beauties of women. You show a great deal of vanity in keeping near you such an accomplished creature, said a lady to the mistress of the house. Ah, my dear, some day perhaps you will find yourself jealous of me in possessing Celestine. She must be endowed with very rare qualities, I suppose. She perhaps dresses you well. Oh, no, very badly. She sews well. She never touches her needle. She is faithful. She is one of those whose fidelity costs more than the most cunning dishonesty. You astonish me, my dear. She is then your foster sister? Not at all. She is positively good for nothing, but she is more useful to me than any other member of my household. If she remains with me 10 years, I have promised her 20,000 francs. It will be money well earned, and I shall not forget to give it, said the young woman, nodding her head with a meaning gesture. At last the questioner of Madame V. Y. understood. When a woman has no friend of her own sex intimate enough to assist her in proving false to marital love, her maid is a last resource which seldom fails in bringing about the desired result. Oh! After 10 years of marriage to find under his roof, and to see all the time, a young girl of from 16 to 18, fresh, dressed with taste, the treasures of whose beauty seem to breathe defiance, whose frank bearing is irresistibly attractive, whose downcast eyes seem to fear you, whose timid glance tempts you, and for whom the conjugal bed has no secrets, for she is at once a virgin and an experienced woman. How can a man remain cold, like Saint Anthony, before such powerful sorcery, and have the courage to remain faithful to the good principles represented by a scornful wife, whose face is always stern, whose manners are always snappish, and who frequently refuses to be caressed? What husband is stoical enough to resist such fires, such frosts? There, where you see a new harvest of pleasure, the young innocent sees an income, and your wife her liberty. It is a little family compact, which is signed in the interest of goodwill. In this case, your wife acts with regard to marriage as young fashionables do with regard to their country. If they are drawn for the army, they buy a man to carry the musket, to die in their place and to spare them the hardships of military life. In compromises of this sort there is not a single woman who does not know how to put her husband in the wrong. I have noticed that, by a supreme stroke of diplomacy, the majority of wives do not admit their maids into the secret of the part which they give them to play. They trust to nature, and assume an affected superiority over the lover and his mistress. These secret perfidies of women explain to a great degree the odd features of married life which are to be observed in the world, and I have heard women discuss, with profound sagacity, the dangers which are inherent in this terrible method of attack, and it is necessary to know thoroughly both the husband and the creature to whom he is to be abandoned, in order to make successful use of her. Many a woman, in this connection, has been the victim of her own calculations. Moreover, the more impetuous and passionate a husband shows himself, the less will a woman dare to employ this expedient, but a husband caught in this snare will never have anything to say to his stern better half, when the maid, giving evidence of the fault she has committed, is sent into the country with an infant and a dowry. 6. Of the doctor. The doctor is one of the most potent auxiliaries of an honest woman, when she wishes to acquire a friendly divorce from her husband. The services that the doctor renders, most of the time without knowing it, to a woman, are of such importance that there does not exist a single house in France where the doctor is chosen by anyone but the wife. All doctors know what great influence women have on their reputation, thus we meet with few doctors who do not study to please the ladies. When a man of talent has become celebrated, it is true that he does not lend himself to the crafty conspiracies which women hatch, but without knowing it he becomes involved in them. I suppose that a husband taught by the adventures of his own youth makes up his mind to pick out a doctor for his wife, from the first days of his marriage. So long as his feminine adversary fails to conceive the assistance that she may derive from this ally, she will submit in silence, but later on, if all her allurements fail to win over the man chosen by her husband, she will take a more favorable opportunity to give her husband her confidence, in the following remarkable manner. I don't like the way in which the doctor feels my pulse. And of course the doctor is dropped. Thus it happens that either a woman chooses her doctor, wins over the man who has been imposed upon her, or procures his dismissal. But this contest is very rare. The majority of young men who marry are acquainted with none but beardless doctors whom they have no anxiety to procure for their wives, and almost always the Aesculapius of the household is chosen by the feminine power. Thus it happens that some fine morning the doctor, when he leaves the chamber of Madame, who has been in bed for a fortnight, is induced by her to say to you, I do not say that the condition of Madame presents any serious symptoms, but this constant drowsiness, this general listlessness, and her natural tendency to a spinal affection demand great care. Her lymph is inspissated. She wants a change of air. She ought to be sent either to the waters of Berges or to the waters of Plombières. All right, doctor. You allow your wife to go to Plombières, but she goes there because Captain Charles is quartered in the Vosges. She returns in capital health and the waters of Plombières have done wonders for her. She has written to you every day. She has lavished upon you from a distance every possible caress. The danger of a spinal affection has utterly disappeared. There is extant a little pamphlet, whose publication was prompted doubtless by hate. It was published in Holland, and it contains some very curious details of the manner in which Madame de Maintenon entered into an understanding with Fagon, for the purposes of controlling Louis XIV. Well, some morning your doctor will threaten you, as Fagon threatened his master, with a fit of apoplexy, if you do not diet yourself. This witty work of satire, doubtless the production of some courtier, entitled Madame de Saint-Tron, has been interpreted by the modern author who has become proverbial as the young doctor. But his delightful sketch is very much superior to the work whose title I cite for the benefit of the book lovers, and we have great pleasure in acknowledging that the work of our clever contemporary has prevented us, out of regard for the glory of the 17th century, from publishing the fragment of the old pamphlet. Very frequently a doctor becomes duped by the judicious maneuvers of a young and delicate wife, and comes to you with the announcement, "Sir, I would not wish to alarm Madam with regard to her condition, but I will advise you, if you value her health, to keep her in perfect tranquillity." The irritation at this moment seems to threaten the chest, and we must gain control of it. There is need of rest for her, perfect rest. The least agitation might change the seat of the malady. At this crisis, the prospect of bearing a child would be fatal to her. But, doctor, yes. I know that. He laughs and leaves the house. Like the rod of Moses, the doctor's mandate makes and unmakes generations. The doctor will restore you to your marriage bed with the same arguments that he used in debarring you. He treats your wife for complaints which she has not, in order to cure her of those which she has, and all the while you have no idea of it, for the scientific jargon of doctors can only be compared to the layers in which they envelop their pills. An honest woman in her chamber with the doctor is like a minister sure of a majority. She has it in her power to make a horse, or a carriage, according to her good pleasure and her taste. She will send you away or receive you, as she likes. Sometimes she will pretend to be ill in order to have a chamber separate from yours. Sometimes she will surround herself with all the paraphernalia of an invalid. She will have an old woman for a nurse, regiments of vials and of bottles, and, environed by these ramparts, will defy you by her invalid airs. She will talk to you in such a depressing way of the electuaries and of the soothing draughts which she has taken, of the agues which she has had, of her plasters and cataplasms, that she will fill you with disgust at these sickly details, if all the time these sham sufferings are not intended to serve as engines by means of which, eventually, a successful attack may be made on that singular abstraction known as your honor. In this way your wife will be able to fortify herself at every point of contact which you possess with the world, with society and with life. Thus everything will take arms against you, and you will be alone among all these enemies. But suppose that it is your unprecedented privilege to possess a wife who is without religious connections, without parents or intimate friends, that you have penetration enough to see through all the tricks by which your wife's lover tries to entrap you, that you still have sufficient love for your fair enemy to resist all the martyrs of the earth, that, in fact, you have for your doctor a man who is so celebrated that he has no time to listen to the maunderings of your wife, or that if your Aesculapius is Madame's vassal, you demand a consultation, and an incorruptible doctor intervenes every time the favorite doctor prescribes a remedy that disquiets you. Even in that case, your prospects will scarcely be more brilliant. In fact, even if you do not succumb to this invasion of allies, you must not forget that, so far, your adversary has not, so to speak, struck the decisive blow. If you hold out still longer, your wife, having flung round you thread upon thread, as a spider spins his web, an invisible net, will resort to the arms which nature has given her, which civilization has perfected, and which will be treated of in the next meditation. Meditation XXVI. Of different weapons. A weapon is anything which is used for the purpose of wounding. From this point of view, some sentiments prove to be the most cruel weapons which man can employ against his fellow man. The genius of Schiller, lucid as it was comprehensive, seems to have revealed all the phenomena which certain ideas bring to light in the human organization by their keen and penetrating action. A man may be put to death by a thought. Such is the moral of those heart-rending scenes, when in The Brigands the poet shows a young man, with the aid of certain ideas, making such powerful assaults on the heart of an old man, that he ends by causing the latter's death. The time is not far distant when science will be able to observe the complicated mechanism of our thoughts and to apprehend the transmission of our feelings. Some developer of the occult sciences will prove that our intellectual organization constitutes nothing more than a kind of interior man, who projects himself with less violence than the exterior man, and that the struggle which may take place between two such powers as these, although invisible to our feeble eyes, is not a less mortal struggle than that in which our external man compels us to engage. But these considerations belong to a different department of study from that in which we are now engaged. These subjects we intend to deal with in a future publication. Some of our friends are already acquainted with one of the most important, that, namely, entitled The Pathology of Social Life, or Meditations Mathematical, Physical, Chemical and Transcendental on the Manifestations of Thought, taken under all the forms which are produced by the state of society, whether by living, marriage, conduct, veterinary medicine, or by speech and action, etc., in which all these great questions are fully discussed. The aim of this brief metaphysical observation is only to remind you that the higher classes of society reason too well to admit of their being attacked by any other than intellectual arms. Although it is true that tender and delicate souls are found enveloped in a body of metallic hardness, at the same time there are souls of bronze enveloped in bodies so supple and capricious that their grace attracts the friendship of others, and their beauty calls for a caress. But if you flatter the exterior man with your hand, the homo duplex, the interior man, to use an expression of Buffon, immediately rouses himself and rends you with his keen points of contact. This description of a special class of human creatures, which we hope you will not run up against during your earthly journey, presents a picture of what your wife may be to you. Every one of the sentiments which nature has endowed your heart with, in their gentlest form, will become a dagger in the hand of your wife. You will be stabbed every moment, and you will necessarily succumb, for your love will flow like blood from every wound. This is the last struggle, but for her it also means victory. In order to carry out the distinction which we think we have established among three sorts of feminine temperament, we will divide this meditation into three parts, under the following titles: 1 of headaches, 2 of nervous affectations, 3 of modesty, in its connection with marriage. 1 of headaches. Women are constantly the dupes or the victims of excessive sensibility, but we have already demonstrated that with the greater number of them this delicacy of soul must needs, almost without their knowing it, receive many rude blows, from the very fact of their marriage. See meditations entitled The Predestined and of the Honeymoon. Most of the means of defense instinctively employed by husbands are nothing but traps set for the liveliness of feminine affections. Now the moment comes when the wife, during the Civil War, traces by a single act of thought the history of her moral life, and is irritated on perceiving the prodigious way in which you have taken advantage of her sensibility. It is very rarely that women, moved either by an innate feeling for revenge, which they themselves can never explain, or by their instinct of domination, fail to discover that this quality in their natural machinery, when brought into play against the man, is inferior to no other instrument for obtaining ascendancy over him. With admirable cleverness, they proceed to find out what chords in the hearts of their husbands are most easily touched, and when once they discover this secret, they eagerly proceed to put it into practice. Then, like a child with a mechanical toy, whose spring excites their curiosity, they go on employing it, carelessly calling into play the movements of the instrument, and satisfied simply with their success in doing so. If they kill you, they will mourn over you with the best grace in the world, as the most virtuous, the most excellent, the most sensible of men. In this way your wife will first arm herself with that generous sentiment which leads us to respect those who are in pain. The man most disposed to quarrel with a woman full of life and health becomes helpless before a woman who is weak and feeble. If your wife has not attained the end of her secret designs, by means of those various methods already described, she will quickly seize this all-powerful weapon. In virtue of this new strategic method, you will see the young girl, so strong in life and beauty, whom you had wedded in her flower, metamorphosing herself into a pale and sickly woman. Now headache is an affection which affords infinite resources to a woman. This malady, which is the easiest of all to feign, for it is destitute of any apparent symptom, merely obliges her to say, "I have a headache." A woman trifles with you and there is no one in the world who can contradict her skull, whose impenetrable bones defy touch or ocular test. Moreover, headache is, in our opinion, the queen of maladies, the pleasantest and the most terrible weapon employed by wives against their husbands. There are some coarse and violent men who have been taught the tricks of women by their mistresses, in the happy hours of their celibacy, and so flatter themselves that they are never to be caught by this vulgar trap. But all their efforts, all their arguments end by being vanquished before the magic of these words: I have a headache. If a husband complains, or ventures on a reproach, if he tries to resist the power of this ilbndokani of marriage, he is lost. Imagine a young woman, voluptuously lying on a divan, her head softly supported by a cushion, one hand hanging down. On a small table close at hand is her glass of lime water. Now place by her side a burly husband. He has made 5 or 6 turns round the room, but each time he has turned on his heels to begin his walk all over again. The little invalid has made a slight movement of her eyebrows in a vain attempt to remind him that the slightest noise fatigues her. At last he musters all his courage and utters a protest against her pretended malady, in the bold phrase, "And have you really a headache?" At these words the young woman slightly raises her languid head, lifts an arm, which feebly falls back again upon her divan, raises her eyes to the ceiling, raises all that she has power to raise, then darting at you a leaden glance, she says in a voice of remarkable feebleness, "Oh, what can be the matter with me? I suffer the agonies of death. And this is all the comfort you give me. Ah! You men, it is plainly seen that nature has not given you the task of bringing children into the world. What egoists and tyrants you are! You take us in all the beauty of our youth, fresh, rosy, with tapering waist, and then all is well. When your pleasures have ruined the blooming gifts which we received from nature, you never forgive us for having forfeited them to you. That was all understood. You will allow us to have neither the virtues nor the sufferings of our condition. You must needs have children, and we pass many nights in taking care of them. But childbearing has ruined our health, and left behind the germs of serious maladies. Oh, what pain I suffer! There are few women who are not subject to headaches, but your wife must be an exception. You even laugh at our sufferings. That is generosity. Please don't walk about. I should not have expected this of you. Stop the clock. The click of the pendulum rings in my head. Thanks. Oh, what an unfortunate creature I am. Have you a scent bottle with you? Yes. Oh, for pity's sake, allow me to suffer in peace, and go away, for this scent splits my head. What can you say in reply? Do you not hear within you a voice which cries, and what if she is actually suffering? Moreover, almost all husbands evacuate the field of battle very quietly, while their wives watch them from the corner of their eyes, marching off on tiptoe and closing the door quietly on the chamber henceforth to be considered sacred by them. Such is the headache, true or false, which is patronized at your home. Then the headache begins to play a regular role in the bosom of your family. It is a theme on which a woman can play many admirable variations. She sets it forth in every key. With the aid of the headache alone a wife can make a husband desperate. A headache seizes Madam when she chooses, where she chooses, and as much as she chooses. There are headaches of 5 days, of 10 minutes, periodic or intermittent headaches. You sometimes find your wife in bed, in pain, helpless, and the blinds of her room are closed. The headache has imposed silence on everyone, from the regions of the porter's lodge, where he is cutting wood, even to the garret of your groom, from which he is throwing down innocent bundles of straw. Believing in this headache, you leave the house, but on your return you find that Madame has decamped. Soon Madame returns, fresh and ruddy. The doctor came, she says, and advised me to take exercise, and I find myself much better. Another day you wish to enter Madame's room. Oh, sir, says the maid, showing the most profound astonishment, Madame has her usual headache, and I have never seen her in such pain. The doctor has been sent for. You are a happy man, said Marshal Augurio to General R. To have such a pretty wife. To have, replied the other. If I have my wife 10 days in the year, that is about all. These confounded women have always either the headache or some other thing. The headache in France takes the place of the sandals, which, in Spain, the confessor leaves at the door of the chamber in which he is with his penitent. If your wife, foreseeing some hostile intentions on your part, wishes to make herself as inviolable as the charter, she immediately gets up a little headache performance. She goes to bed in a most deliberate fashion, she utters shrieks which rend the heart of the hearer. She goes gracefully through a series of gesticulations so cleverly executed that you might think her a professional contortionist. Now what man is there so inconsiderate as to dare to speak to a suffering woman about desires which, in him, prove the most perfect health? Politeness alone demands of him perfect silence. A woman knows under these circumstances that by means of this all-powerful headache, she can at her will paste on her bed the placard which sends back home the amateurs who have been allured by the announcement of the Comédie Française, when they read the words, closed through the sudden indisposition of Mademoiselle Mars. O headache, protectress of love, tariff of married life, buckler against which all married desires expire. O mighty headache! Can it be possible that lovers have never sung thy praises, personified thee, or raised thee to the skies? O magic headache, O delusive headache, blessed be the brain that first invented thee. Shame on the doctor who shall find out thy preventive. Yes, thou art the only ill that women bless, doubtless through gratitude for the good things thou dispensest to them, O deceitful headache! O magic headache! 2 of nervous affectations. There is, however, a power which is superior even to that of the headache, and we must avow to the glory of France, that this power is one of the most recent which has been won by Parisian genius. As in the case with all the most useful discoveries of art and science, no one knows to whose intellect it is due. Only, it is certain that it was towards the middle of the last century that vapors made their first appearance in France. Thus while Pepin was applying the force of vaporized water in mechanical problems, a French woman, whose name unhappily is unknown, had the glory of endowing her sex with the faculty of vaporizing their fluids. Very soon the prodigious influence obtained by vapors was extended to the nerves. It was thus in passing from fiber to fiber that the science of neurology was born. This admirable science has since then led such men as Phillips and other clever physiologists to the discovery of the nervous fluid in its circulation. They are now perhaps on the eve of identifying its organs, and the secret of its origin and of its evaporation. And thus, thanks to certain quackeries of this kind, we may be enabled some day to penetrate the mysteries of that unknown power which we have already called more than once in the present book, the will. But do not let us trespass on the territory of medical philosophy. Let us consider the nerves and the vapors solely in their connection with marriage. Victims of neurosis, a pathological term under which are comprised all affections of the nervous system, suffer in two ways, as far as married women are concerned, for our physiology has the loftiest disdain for medical classifications. Thus we recognize only 1. Classic neurosis, 2. Romantic neurosis. The classic affection has something bellicose and excitable on it. Those who thus suffer are as violent in their antics as pythonesses, as frantic as monads, as excited as bacchantes. It is a revival of antiquity, pure and simple. The romantic sufferers are mild and plaintive as the ballads sung amid the mists of Scotland. They are pallid as young girls carried to their bier by the dance or by love. They are eminently elegiac and they breathe all the melancholy of the north. That woman with black hair, with piercing eye, with high color, with dry lips and a powerful hand, will become excited and convulsive. She represents the genius of classic neurosis, while a young blonde woman, with white skin, is the genius of romantic neurosis. To one belongs the empire gained by nerves, to the other the empire gained by vapors. Very frequently a husband, when he comes home, finds his wife in tears. What is the matter, my darling? It is nothing. But you are in tears. I weep without knowing why. I am quite sad. I saw faces in the clouds, and those faces never appear to me except on the eve of some disaster. I think I must be going to die. Then she talks to you in a low voice of her dead father, of her dead uncle, of her dead grandfather, of her dead cousin. She invokes all these mournful shades. She feels as if she had all their sicknesses. She is attacked with all the pains they felt. She feels her heart palpitate with excessive violence. She feels her spleen swelling. You say to yourself, with a self-satisfied air, I know exactly what this is all about. And then you try to soothe her. But you find her a woman who yawns like an open box, who complains of her chest, who begins to weep anew, who implores you to leave her to her melancholy and her mournful memories. She talks to you about her last wishes, follows her own funeral, is buried, plants over her tomb the green canopy of a weeping willow, and at the very time when you would like to raise a joyful epithalamium, you find an epitaph to greet you all in black. Your wish to console her melts away in the cloud of Ixion. There are women of undoubted fidelity who in this way extort from their feeling husbands cashmere shawls, diamonds, the payment of their debts, or the rent of a box at the theatre. But almost always vapors are employed as decisive weapons in civil war. On the plea of her spinal affection or of her weak chest, a woman takes pains to seek out some distraction or other. You see her dressing herself in soft fabrics like an invalid with all the symptoms of spleen. She never goes out because an intimate friend, her mother or her sister, has tried to tear her away from that divan which monopolizes her and on which she spends her life in improvising elegies. Madam is going to spend a fortnight in the country because the doctor orders it. In short, she goes where she likes and does what she likes. Is it possible that there can be a husband so brutal as to oppose such desires, by hindering a wife from going to seek a cure for her cruel sufferings? For it has been established after many long discussions that in the nerves originate the most fearful torture. But it is especially in bed that vapors play their part. There, when a woman has not a headache, she has her vapors, and when she has neither vapors nor headache, she is under the protection of the girdle of Venus, which, as you know, is a myth. Among the women who fight with you the battle of vapors, are some more blonde, more delicate, more full of feeling than others, and who possess the gift of tears. How admirably do they know how to weep! They weep when they like, as they like and as much as they like. They organize a system of offensive warfare which consists of manifesting sublime resignation, and they gain victories which are all the more brilliant, inasmuch as they remain all the time in excellent health. Does a husband, irritated beyond all measure, at last express his wishes to them? They regard him with an air of submission, bow their heads and keep silence. This pantomime almost always puts a husband to rout. In conjugal struggles of this kind, a man prefers a woman should speak and defend herself, for then he may show elation or annoyance, but as for these women, not a word. Their silence distresses you and you experience a sort of remorse, like the murderer who, when he finds his victim offers no resistance, trembles with redoubled fear. He would prefer to slay him in self-defense. You return to the subject. As you draw near, your wife wipes away her tears and hides her handkerchief, so as to let you see he has been weeping.